Welcome to the Spirit-Led Podcast, your guide on a journey to full enlightenment in this beautiful life. I'm your host, Joan Hope Craig. Each episode we explore spiritual wisdom, life's purpose, and the profound impact of daily choices on our personal growth and the world. Well, welcome, Phillip Wilder. I'm so happy to have you on the Spirit-Led Podcast. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Let me tell the audience a little bit about you. They may not have met you before. So Phillip Wilder is an associate professor at Clemson University in South Carolina, and his research explores how youth and educators practice nonviolent communication. That's what we're going to talk about today. He has 2 decades of experience leading international educational partnerships, and these focus on conscious communication, cultivating peace and connection within people and communities. And he's currently leading nonviolent communication initiatives in the Philippines, Tanzania, and the United States, believing that all peace begins within. When he's not guiding international trainings or advising his partnerships, he can be found backpacking or teaching yoga and meditation. And I know Phillip through the local yoga community here in Greenville, South Carolina, and I know him as someone who always is present, a great listener, someone that I have respected for just his commitment to walking the talk in his life and in his work. So I'm just happy to have you here. And I invited Phillip to talk about compassionate communication, nonviolent communication, and really how it's a tool to help us on the awakening journey. So welcome again.
Thank you so much for that. And it's sometimes a challenge to try and condense like who am I in 3-4 sentences. So I really appreciate you saying a little bit about what's important to me and my values.
Yeah, well, that's what we're here for, is to hear about that today. So nonviolent communication, it may be a new term. Some of our listeners may be familiar with it, some may not. So can you start us out with the basics of what it is and how it's helpful to a lot of our listeners are people who are really trying to wake up. I mean, we're really doing it. So how is it helpful for us?
Yeah, so nonviolent communication is a framework that was developed by Marshall Rosenberg a couple of decades ago. And essentially, I want to introduce it just with an example. So let's say that, of course, you invited me onto the podcast, and the time that we were going to start, I don't show up. I'm not here. You might feel a little confused. You might have some unpleasant feelings going on, and you might reach out and you have an opportunity to communicate with me. And knowing you and who you are and your walk and your talk, I know that you'd be very sort of understanding and even maybe a little curious about, is everything okay with you, Phillip? So let's say that I respond and say, oh, everything is just fine. And we set up another date to do it. And I no show again. Well, now you've got some unpleasant feelings going on, I'm imagining. So NVC, or nonviolent communication, says that they're essentially, the goal is connection. The goal of connection and what you would say to me and what I'd say back to you is to be connected to each other while acknowledging that every single action that we take as humans is grounded in our effort to meet our needs. And these needs are sometimes we're aware of, sometimes we're not aware of them. So it might sound like this. Using NVC, you could reach out and say, hey, Phillip, I noticed that you weren't on our scheduled Zoom. And so I'm feeling confused and kind of frustrated. And I just need some clarity and some understanding. Would you be willing to have a phone call? So you're speaking your truth through nonviolent communication with 4 parts. There's a choice to focus on observation instead of judgment. Because we know I have, and I'm sure we all have in our lives, responded with words that are rooted in judgment and blame. And it would have sounded something like, Phillip, I tried to give you 2 opportunities, and you don't care enough about me, and we automatically create this story of blame. So NVC says that we can state what we observe, what we see, what we hear. It also says that then we can communicate what we're feeling. And in my example, you would state, oh, I'm feeling confused, right? um, instead of what we're thinking. So NVC prompts us to be responsible for our feelings, but to see them as wisdom, that our emotions are wisdom trying to communicate to us. And then that third component is the need, that the feelings arise because they're communicating if our needs are met or not. So that's something that I don't know if everyone is aware of. The purpose of emotion is to communicate to us and to be a guidance for us, a compass for us, so that we can meet needs, not in a selfish way, but in a connective way with each other and to live within community and thrive. And of course, the last component after needs, the fourth one, is request instead of demand. Instead of saying, you must be on this Zoom right now, well, we know from our experience with demands that it's going to prompt someone to either submit or rebel. Or even if they submit, like they're not doing it from a place of choice. So NVC essentially says we can communicate through these four components, through an observation, through our feelings, through our needs, and through a request. And then we can listen and be present with another and use our words to help them connect with what is alive within them. What are you feeling? What are you needing? Joan, I hear that you're frustrated. Are you needing some clarity from me? So it really prompts us to be present and to connect with ourselves, to be present and connect with another. That's my best 60-second overview.
I think it's a great overview
Mhm.
because I've been studying NVC, gosh, maybe somewhere between 15 and 20 years, not officially studying, but I've been aware of it, say that. And you did sum it up really well. And what I'm hearing you say is that it requires presence. You
It does.
can't do any of those things without checking in with yourself first. So it requires um, a discipline in pausing and before we have our normal response or our normal reaction to someone.
Yeah, because I think that it's a choice to pause. It's a choice to be present. It's a choice to have a gap between an event or an experience or stimulus, right? And our response. Otherwise, it leads to reaction and we feel that disconnection in our body. We feel it energetically with another person when there's blame involved or when I'm not even aware of what I'm feeling or what I'm needing. So that pause is essential. And there are times where I will tell someone, I'm feeling a little confused about what I'm feeling. So would it be okay if I reached back out to you tomorrow? Because I really want to be present and I want to be able to know what I'm feeling and I want to be able to understand and listen to what you're feeling and needing.
Mm.
There's a choice there um, because knowing our internal waters takes practice and it takes a willingness to pause.
Phillip, would you be willing to share about your journey with NVC, maybe how you got started, how you got into it, but also how has it helped you personally in what you feel is like your personal evolution, or we're all evolving towards enlightenment. So how is it helping you?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's quite a challenging question for me because I know a rudimentary example of or an answer of like when I came across the book, right? So I'll start with that. I was dating a woman. This is about 8, 10 years ago now, and she was in a book club, and she lived in another state, and I went to visit her, and we usually would go out to dinner. And she said, "Oh, I'm going to be late. I'm in this book club." And I said, "Well, what book club?" And she's like, "Well, it's on nonviolent communication." And I was unfamiliar with it as a framework, as a book, as a way of being. And so I asked her, I said, "Well, what prompted you to join the book club?" And she gave such an answer that I just resonated deeply. She said, I want to improve the way that I show up for myself and show up for you and show up for others in my life." And I was really inspired by that. I got a copy of the book. I started reading it. And that's the short answer or the easy answer to your question. I think in terms of the way that it has impacted me is I have a long history in my life as a literacy and language professor of paying attention to language and paying attention to the way that language is used and paying attention to the way that language connects and disconnects. And so NVC has been a framework for me to pay attention to my own use of language. But more than just the language, I have learned over the years that NVC is not a mental practice. Some people can use it as a cognitive practice, as a language-based practice to get what they want. And it's not a strategy to get what you want or to get your needs met. It's a way of being that allows us to be connected with another. So it's a spiritual practice. And so for me, it has really challenged me and afforded me opportunities to think about what is the story that I'm bringing into this encounter? What are the patterns, the ways of me being that were given to me or that I've learned or that I've created that are actually impeding connection with the other person? In what way am I even considering or not considering or seeing or not seeing them? And what does that say about me? And can I do all of this with empathy for myself and for the other? So I think I'd finish by just saying that it's been a practice of mine. It's been a way of living that is empathetic. It's a way of living that is curious. It's a way of living that interrogates the stories that we have in our mind, which in my experience are often disconnected from spirit, disconnected from our heart, and prompts us to see relationships as transactional instead of what spirit desires, which says they are connective and the other person is no different than us. Because I can be Philip the personality and you can be Joan the personality, but inherently, what is within me is within you. And to be connected in a deep way to spirit, to each other, is our nature. And NVC has helped to pull back the words, pull back the stories, pull back the patterns, to unlearn and to realize that we reside within that deep spiritual presence with each other.
Pausing to absorb what you're saying.
But there are times where I'm reminded that NVC, this is ironic, doesn't require words. But to have this presence with another, we must first have it with ourselves. I cannot share my needs with you, and I cannot have empathy and truly hear your needs if I'm unaware of what I'm feeling. And if I'm unaware of what I'm feeling, it might be because I'm residing up here. I'm using my day and my Google Calendar and all of my activities, and I'm residing up here, being productive, being efficient, doing all of those things that we do, which have a place, but they can disconnect me from what I'm feeling. So, as humans, and I would speak as a man, how willing are we to feel? How adept are we at knowing what spirit is trying to communicate through emotions? Do we shy away? Do we analyze it? Do we distract ourselves with food or activities or people or whatever it is? Or are we willing to be still and to feel and to say, what is it, spirit, that you are nudging or maybe not nudging, yelling at me to see? So all of that is rooted in a spiritual practice of being open and allowing spirit to communicate first.
Thank you for all that wisdom you just shared. I'm looking forward already to listening to it again to absorb it more. And what I'm feeling as you speak, I'm feeling grateful. Um, I'm feeling nurtured. I'm feeling nourished by what you've said. And one of the things I love about NVC, and you've alluded to it, is that it's really practical for being in the world with other humans. I find that I do pretty well at being peaceful and quiet when I'm by myself. You know, and then it's like, oh, I don't usually, you know, overreact or have meltdowns when I'm by myself. It has happened, but
Totally.
it's in relationships and even casual ones or just circumstances. I think we can use NVC to connect with other humans, but we can also use it, as you said, to connect with ourselves in a circumstance. How am I feeling about this? And what story am I creating in my head? You gave us so many gems. And to me, it's many practices all in one. It's
Mm,
mindfulness. You have to be present and aware without judgment. You have to do the pausing. You have to check in with yourself. It's self-awareness, lowercase s and capital S. And it's you said it beautifully. It's about connection. And so if I go through my day, not less concerned about my agenda and what I want to get out of the situation or the interaction, but more concerned about connecting to my environment and the people, that's the best approach.
yeah. Yeah. And if that, for me, that connection leads to a lot of pleasant feelings, a lot of joy, a lot of excitement, right? Um, and that's the compass. That's the spiritual compass of when we are lit up, when we are excited, when we feel light and free and connected. It's like spirit is saying, do more of this, go in that direction. And how can I know which direction to go in life? How can I know if my job is actually my spiritual work? How can I know if this intimate partnership is fulfilling? How do I know any of these things unless I know what it feels like to be deeply connected to self and spirit and to follow that compass? So, yeah, NVC to me is far more than just a four component language based practice of communicating with another one. And I really appreciate what you just said of like, it's kind of easy to do this with someone who's practicing NVC as well, right? Um, or it's really easy to do it with people that we really, well, that are present with us, right? But the closer the relationship, the more is at stake. Or if a person is really annoying, a person is really angry, really divisive, focused on blaming others or even blaming us a lot, it doesn't feel good. It feels disconnected. How do we navigate that without losing our center? There are some real challenges with practicing this in our world today, with so much violence going on, not just in terms of what's going on in Gaza or what's going on in the DRC or what's going on in Sudan, or we could go on and on. But what about what's going on in homes? What about the violence and not just physical violence? What about the emotional violence that's occurring? Um, Violence is so pervasive. So at no time do I think there's been a greater need for communication that's conscious and intentional and rooted in spirit.
Philip, would you give some examples? It could be from like your own life or other examples that you've learned about when we would use it and how we would use it. You gave a great lead in at the beginning, but maybe uh, give us some practical ideas for people who are not familiar with it of a sample conversation or a dialogue.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that it's it comes to the surface for us that the opportunity, the challenge, when someone does something we don't like. And I just, I value keeping it that simple because that can be on a, scale of 1 to 10, it can be a one. I didn't like the way that that person took the last donut at the Village Grind in Greenville, right? Or it could be a 9 or 10 with a relative blaming us for their own pain. So no matter where it is on the continuum, when someone does something that we don't like, it can be an opportunity for us to lean into that and to say what's going on here. So, for example, I was driving this morning back home, and Philip, NVC Philip, turns into a tyrant when he's driving. Anyone that knows me really well will be like, "Who are you when you drive?" And it's just something I'm working on. But like all of those violent parts in me come out. So I'm driving home this morning, and there is a road that goes from two lanes into one lane on East North Street. Maybe some of you know where that is, or you know where it is. And the person, I was in the left lane, it was going to be my lane the whole time, and a person on the right speeds up and cuts me off and darts in front of me. And instinctively, I yelled at the person. And I'm not going to give the exact words and phrase, but I was really angry. And then, like a second or two later, I paused. And this is an interesting example because I wasn't directly communicating with the person. So some might be thinking, oh, well, this isn't involving NVC. You're not talking to the other person. No, I actually am. Because I created a story about the other person, about their motives, about why they did this, about how little they care about my need for safety or my need for autonomy. And so there I was in my angry response, and I was unaware of what I was feeling and needing. I was just angry. And I took that violence, so to speak, and I was putting it on them energetically. Now I didn't you know, follow them for a mile. I didn't honk the horn. This could have gone a lot of directions, but I think that what I'm saying is that was a very small, everyday experience that the essence of NVC can be applied to that. And so I just paused. Okay, why am I angry? Yeah, I'm angry because he cut me off. No, I'm not angry because he cut me off. That's just what happened. What need of mine is not being met when the person did that. Because if I say I'm angry because he cut me off, then I'm blaming him for my feeling. And I'm saying that he controls my feelings and my needs. Therefore, I'm giving away my power. So I had to pause and say, when he cut me off, there's the observation in NVC. When he cut in front of me, I felt angry because I needed respect. Because I'm here, I'm driving the speed limit, I'm following the rules, and you are not. And so it helped me just articulate, oh, my need for respect is not being met. And it's not that the other person caused my anger, they triggered it. So that's a very everyday example. And this could go to, the opposite end of the continuum of being something where there's a very heated discussion or conflict with a relative or a partner. And we get so angry, and the story in our head is already full of a narrative. They did this to me. They don't care. They've done this time and time again. I need to protect myself. And before we know it, we're not responding to their texts. And we're putting emotional distance between ourselves and the other person. Or we're even complaining to a friend about this relative or this partner. And look at the damage that we're doing instead of pausing and saying, what am I feeling? What is the unmet need within me right now? And the last thing I'll say is, can I consider what they might be feeling and what they might be needing that they are communicating or not communicating? And can I commune with the anger long enough to where I am friends with the sadness or the grief or whatever it is below the anger? And with clarity, then I can reach out to the person and say, when this happened, I'm feeling this way and I'm needing this. Would you be willing to talk about this? And then I can show up with presence and empathy for my feelings and needs and their feelings and needs.
Thank you for that example. I think everybody can relate to both ends of the spectrum, the little small annoyances of the day. And then, here we are on the spiritual path. That doesn't mean that we don't have interpersonal issues that come up. And sometimes they're really great teachers. The last month's guest actually said sometimes Your teachers show up as really challenging situations, and we have to be grateful for all of them. I really appreciated that you said it didn't make me mad, it triggered my anger. And that's something I found really helpful from NVC because I think just in our language, we often, most of my life, I would say something like, it made me sad, even if it was a situation or a person, that made me sad. It made me angry. It made me whatever. And nothing makes us feel an emotion. As you said, we feel it. It could be a trigger, could be our response to what we're observing. That's been a really helpful clarification for me internally.
Yeah, and there's an opportunity for us to say, why is this triggering me? What is my history of my need for respect not being met? Or what is my history for reciprocity not being met in a relationship? And when was I told, or when was I given, or when did I create this story that my job is to pay more attention to the needs of the other person, for example, than my own? And yet then I build up resentment and frustration when it doesn't feel reciprocal and I don't have the consideration that I need. Well, where did this story begin? When did this practice begin? And therefore, that's the opportunity that the other person, even in a painful way, is providing. And I think that there's a willingness to that of, can we lean into any conflict, any unpleasant feeling, grief, anger, no matter what it is, can we lean into it and say, why are you here? You're here to open me more, to connect me more to spirit, to reveal more of what needs to be unlearned. And can I, ooh, this is a tough one. Can I have gratitude for this experience while seeing the other person as in their own story? They're in their own conflict. They're in their own disconnection from spirit, perhaps. So I really appreciate what you're saying in terms of there's an opportunity there. And it's not easy.
What comes to my mind is the phrase of be the change in the world. And NVC seems like a tool we can use all day long, every day that anytime we're awake. Because I think about, okay, I can meditate a certain number of minutes or hours a day. I can practice hatha yoga. I can walk in nature. I can have solitude and silence. All of
Mm,
those things are great and they really help me. But then again, I need those tools that I can use when I'm working, when I'm driving, when I'm tired, when I'm cranky. There
yeah.
actually you said you've got a driving Phillip. There's a cranky Joan that comes out if she's tired or hungry. So, um, and we can use it on ourselves with our self-talk. So I love everything you're sharing.
Mm,
Practical.
yeah. Yeah. There's just a willingness to be curious about it. And I have learned, I'm still learning, that willingness to be curious also can accompany empathy. So there's a distinction to be made between responsibility and blame. And NVC is very clear that there's not a place to blame ourselves for what we did and maybe regret, or to blame another person. There is a place for responsibility. So so this doesn't excuse me or another person from our actions that did trigger pain for another person. Because my desire is not to trigger pain in anyone, but my limited awareness, my disconnection from spirit is what's triggering the pain. So if I do something that someone else doesn't like, what's challenging sometimes is, am I responsible for this? Where is the responsibility? What is being triggered within them versus, I don't want to be a source of triggering for a person. And I don't want a person to be a source of triggering for me. But when it happens, we can say, okay, what is desiring to be revealed here that will limit the triggering in the future? So I'm responsible for actions that I have taken in life that were reflected of my limited understanding and ability to love and be loved while not blaming myself for what I didn't know. I can take responsibility. I can apologize. I can own it. The other person can do the same. But blame suggests that there was an intention that I did this to hurt you. You did this to hurt me. And I think that's very murky waters when we get into blame because stories are attached to that.
Let's pause, Philip. I've really appreciate everything you've shared so far. And I'd like to talk about something that you mentioned is important, which is the difference between learning NVC and maybe like practicing it from a mechanical cognitive sense and then living it. You alluded to that we can do it even without words. Say more about that journey and how that's been for you.
Yeah, I think the difference between learning and living has been correlated to how open I have been. So I can go to a workshop, I can read the book, I can learn about the four components of NVC, observe, feelings, needs, requests. Um, and I can even use that when it's easy. When I'm at the coffee shop, for example, and someone, is taking a long time at the counter. Now, this can be something that I can live, that I can practice. So a lot of organizations will approach me and they'll say, "Oh, well, we'd love for you to come and do a workshop for our leadership team for 3, 4 hours on NVC." And I'm like, "Great, I'd love to do that." And then I ask them, "So what will it look like for your team to integrate this into their lives and then later into work?" That means that there's a level of emotional awareness that I've had to develop, that we all have to develop. What am I feeling? That there is a level of, whether it's using meditation or yoga or walks in uh, hikes, but there's a level of quieting the mind. There is an ability to quiet the mind to focus on what we're observing and to see, oh, I'm telling that story again. Oh, isn't that interesting how when Joan said that, now I'm all angry. I wonder why this is, right? So living it has to be married with curiosity and emotional awareness and presence and empathy for the other person. And so the degree to which I continue to open more is directly related to how I can practice this in my own life. So that if my family member leaves me an angry voicemail and they're blaming me, blaming, can I look at them as a 9-year-old who's got a broken arm or who's hurting? And can I pick up the phone and say, hey, seems like you're really angry at me and that your needs are not being met. I'd love to understand more what's going on inside of you. Well, when you did this and you did, okay, so you're really angry at me. Okay, yeah, and then you didn't call. So you're needing some consideration. Is that right? Or are you needing me to consider you? Yeah, you didn't consider me at all when, okay, I hear how important that is to you. Like living it means that I'm holding the space for the emotions of others without taking it personally and realizing that, oh, they're just feeling something very unpleasant and their needs are not being met, and I care about them in the same way that I care about myself and my needs getting met. There's a very big difference between learning about it, going to a workshop, listening to the audiobook, and then practicing presence and emotional awareness and pausing and all of these things with relationships that we feel a greater risk of losing.
Thank you for that example and explanation. when I said about being the change in the world, what I also wanted to communicate was that it's, to me, it's also a way of service.
Mm, that's right.
Because when I'm focused on myself and getting my needs met and my feelings, that's good. But it's to me perhaps a higher level. Maybe it's not a higher level, just a sister practice to go into the world really able to help others by even just being there to, as you said, just to witness, oh, wow, you're feeling this and you're needing this. And that they might not have ever gotten able to say that even to themselves. And so you've given them a gift,
Yeah, and to not say it because I'm wanting to then swing the conversation around to something, get what I want.
just really to be there.
It's to be there. So therefore, this is a practice that emanates from the heart of me caring about this person, while also recognizing, to be honest, that sometimes we need to love people from the other side of the street, right? That we, if, you know, if I'm only focused on my needs and I'm not listening or paying attention to the needs of others or considering that, that's selfish. If I'm only paying attention to the needs of the other person and prioritizing their needs over mine and ignoring mine or not communicating mine to them, well, that's self-betrayal. Neither of those are connective to the other person or to ourselves. So to truly have that spiritual connection and to be connected with each other and to thrive, I think that you're spot on there. We need to do it of service to the other, even when they're not being pleasant, even
That
when that
takes strength.
takes strength. But, you know, there was a time years ago I had to tell a sibling, like, oh, you're really angry at me. Okay, I hear you. And it all calmed down, and we kind of got to a place where, that her needs were being heard and we felt connected. And then I said, would you be willing to listen to my experience with this engagement? And what I need is for you to come to me with your feelings and needs instead of blaming me for your pain. Because when you do that, I'm not going to want to be close to you. So that was me honoring my needs, right? But also being of service to the person that I love. But if a person is constantly focusing on their needs and ignoring ours, boundaries are going to be needed at some point. So there's a delicate dance there, right? Of being of service to ourselves and the other.
I really like love them from the other side of the street. That's a good one. I'll take that one away.
Yeah, if I could say one last thing about that is the real challenge for me is, can my heart be the same whether they say yes or no to my request? Joanne, I'd really love to go out to dinner with you and your husband, and no, I don't think that works for us. Oh, well, what about next week? Well, I'm sensing that I really am not wanting to have a closer friendship with you. Oh, okay. Thanks for considering. Like, can I have the same energy, open-heartedness, whether the answer is yes or no? That's loving someone from the other side of the street.
That's also equanimity, which
Totally.
is the yoga practice. That's what we're aiming for, right? To be in the world, watch it all unfold, and do our best, but not be attached, right? We got to
Right.
roll through all these human experiences.
That's right.
Oh, this has been so fun. I want to ask you, because you alluded to it just a moment ago. You said about working with organizations, and I know that you are very passionate about some of the work you've done
Yeah.
with groups. So, would you just share briefly with the listeners about your work? I think it's really inspiring.
Yeah. So I work with organizations in the US, internationally, um, who are desiring greater connection within their organization, and also who run educational programs that serve students. So I'll give you an example of one. I've been working with Mwangaza Education for Partnership, which is in Tanzania, in Arusha, Tanzania. I've been working with them since 1998. And for the last almost 10 years, I've been their senior advisor. So it's a Tanzanian NGO, and brilliant Tanzanians running it. But they run programs in secondary schools in Tanzania to create more physical and emotional safety for students. So they included in that program, they run peace clubs. So right now we have a pilot program, a 5-year pilot program with 10 secondary schools in northern Tanzania that serve over 10,000 students total. And we have teacher training, we have parent training, and then we have the peace clubs for students. And nonviolent communication is the heart of that entire program. So parents, teachers, heads of schools, the cooks, the gardeners, and all of the students are learning and practicing nonviolent communication. So I want to give you a sample from one of those peace clubs of sort of the not just the power of it, but how the students in this peace club they're my teacher. You know, we have this myth that we as white folks in the West, we can go with our answers and we can go with our solutions and we can go to other countries in the world and we are the teacher. And I would say that we're all teachers, we're all students. I want to give you an example of the power of nonviolent communication within a peace club. So I spent 3 months in Tanzania recently. I was there January and through the beginning of April. And I was spending time with a peace club at a government school that was an all-girls school. And in their peace club, they have about 200 girls that meet in the group every week for 2 or 3 hours. And out of that, me and my friend there, a Tanzanian friend, created this practice group. So we have a practice group of 15 girls, and they meet 3 times a week for about 2 hours each time to practice, to role play nonviolent communication. So there is a young woman who is Form 1. Form 1 in Tanzania is the equivalent of like a freshman in high school. But she's 13. And that week we were focused on anger. And so we had the girls write individually, write about the last time you were really angry. And they wrote this out. Now in a smaller group, get feedback from other girls using NVC of what were you feeling? What were you needing? Kind of like, let's workshop this story of what happened and then role play it. One of the girls in the group will be the other person. You will be you. And let's use NVC to talk to the other person that you are angry with. And then after the role play, we talk about how did your story shift? So this one girl that was Form 1 was wanting to role play a situation that happened with her mother, in that her mother was wanting to remove her from school because her performance at school, her grades weren't high enough, which, by the way, all instruction is in English, which is this girl's third language. So there are lots of reasons why it might be difficult for her. But her mom wanted to pull her out of school, and she would not talk to this young woman about it. She said, I'm going to pull you out of the school, and your father and I want to accept a dowry from a man for you to become his wife. So here she is at 14, and she's got angry, or got angry. She's got anger, and she's angry because her livelihood, her needs are being decided for her. So she role plays with another student this conversation where she communicates to her mother, when you said that my needs don't matter, I felt really angry at you, mother. And I will say that in Tanzania and lots of places in the world, it's not acceptable for a 14-year-old to tell a parent this. And she did in the role play. I felt really angry and I felt very sad because I need some consideration and I need support from you. Would you be willing to explain why you won't listen to me? So it was empowering for her to say that, even in a role play. But the reason I'm sharing this story is because afterwards I asked her, I said, that was wonderful. I celebrated it. And in front of the practice group, I said, so why were you angry? And this 14-year-old paused and she looked at us and she said, because when my mother yelled at me, my need for support wasn't met. So, this 14-year-old, within this context of parents wanting to accept a dowry to marry her off, and she is like one of my favorite people in the world. She used her words intentionally to connect with her mother because what I didn't tell you about the role play is after her request, the other girl who was pretending to be her mother was really angry. And so this 14-year-old took the spotlight. Instead of talking about her own feelings, she put it on her mother and said, so you're really angry with me right now. And she was focusing on helping her mother to connect to what was alive in her, what her mother was feeling and needing, because she was wanting to maintain the connection, not to get what she wanted, which is to stay in school. So she set that aside to connect with her mother. So she taught me that day, she reminded me that day that the connection is most important, that we can desire what we want, and her needs are important. But she could have slid into blaming her mother, and none of us would have really argued with her about doing it. And I was just awestruck by the wisdom that she had at 14 to focus on the connection so that her and her mother could talk this out, which they did. She's still in school. Where was this learning for me when I was 14?
Amen. Wow. I love that she's still in school. Thank you for giving us the happy ending to the story. And I think that you've really summed it up. If anyone is listening and has not explored NVC, I think that story would motivate them to look into it, just because I agree. And I'm glad you're working with youth. You know, they are going to take care of the planet for us and us, hopefully,
They have
as
left,
we grow.
they have less to unlearn
Yes.
than when I started learning this at 40, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Phillip, this has been delightful, and I want to ask just a couple more questions.
Sure.
If someone wants to get started learning NVC, what do you recommend?
Yeah. So, two things. One is I think there's value in learning about it. There's value in going to workshops. So, for example, if anyone's in the upstate, I'm leading a 2-day workshop on conscious communication at the Dawn Center, which is a wonderful retreat center up by Jones Gap. You can reach out to me and find the Dawn Center on social media. And that's a great opportunity to just understand from a foundational standpoint, what is it like to practice NVC? That's the first thing I'd say. The second is after we get sort of a cursory understanding, we need a practice group. We need to practice with others, even if it's once a month. Reach out to me. I can connect you with a practice group, folks who are getting together once a month just to talk about how is your NVC practice going? What do you want to celebrate? What do you want to mourn, or what tensions are you experiencing? But the practicing is so important, whether it's an official or an unofficial practice group. But I've been part of a men's group for the last 5 or 6 years, and we meet twice a month to have a space for us just to share what we're learning as men. So I think it's really important to surround ourselves with people who are also inquisitive, also who are introspective, also who are wanting to connect deeply with spirit and to have that guide, not just our communication and our relationship, but our lives. And so that's my go-to advice.
And if they're not near us, because we have listeners all over the world, we can
Sure.
help maybe provide some links in the notes for groups and workshops other places.
Absolutely. Our technology is a huge advantage. It allows
Yeah.
me, right before I jumped on with you, I was FaceTiming with that girls' practice group. So,
Yeah, yeah, great.
so we
Yeah.
we can use the technology. There's so many opportunities for us to join with others and practice.
Well, and in maybe wrapping up, if someone does want to stay in touch with you, can we put some links in the podcast notes, or do you want to say anything out loud of how they can reach you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll have my email there, my socials. You can reach out to me. And I would love to connect and share some resources or direct you in a way that would be supportive of what you're needing.
Yeah.
Um, I really am grateful for the opportunity just to share the space with you and everyone else, and to consider what it really means to communicate in a nonviolent way with ourselves and others.
Mm.
And that spirit is asking us to open to this.
Is there anything else you want to leave us with? Would you like to close with a prayer or a blessing or any more words of wisdom?
I saw that in your invitation in the email, and I've been perseverating on that one, thinking, how do I want to close this? And I decided that I just wanted to close in whatever way spirit was going to lead. So if it's okay with you, I would just invite everyone to just close your eyes and let's pause for a few seconds. Come back to our center. Come back to that place of peace and stillness. I would invite you to think of the last person that you had conflict with, whether it was a capital C conflict that stirred very difficult emotions for you and for them, or maybe it was a lowercase c conflict that was fleeting. But think of this conflict, think of this person, and notice the disconnection that you feel. Notice how your mind might have a story about the other person and about yourself, about why the conflict happened. Now I'd invite you to move from your mind to your heart. And when you think of this conflict, what do you feel? Is it pleasant if you and the other have resolved it? Maybe you feel connection with this other person, or maybe you feel unpleasant feelings in your heart. But try and identify what you feel by feeling it. Does it feel heavy? Does it feel constricting? And where do you feel this in your body? And beneath that feeling, beneath that heaviness and that constriction, is a need. What might the other person be feeling? Might they feel heaviness and constriction and disconnection? How might they be carrying that in their body? Knowing that their unmet needs live below that same heaviness. There's an opportunity as we open our eyes again, come back to the space. There's an opportunity to communicate with words what our heart is already communicating. And can we be present? Are we willing to be present with ourselves? To listen to the mind, but ultimately quiet the mind, quiet the story, and come back to the heart. What do I feel? What is this feeling communicating? What might, because we don't know what the other person is feeling or needing, what might they feel or need? And with loving energy connected to spirit now, can we find the words focused on connection that meets our needs and meets their needs? And if they're not willing, the loving connection is still there. If we're not willing, the loving connection is still there. So thank you for sharing the space with me, for allowing me to end in that manner, and for all the ways that we're already connecting to spirit and each other in peaceful ways.
Thank you for tuning in to the Spirit-Led Podcast. Special thanks to our producer, Monty Craig. Please subscribe to catch upcoming episodes. For support in your awakening journey, visit our sponsor, the Center for Spiritual Awareness at csa-davis.org. We offer online group meditations, classes, and in-person retreats at our headquarters in Lakemont, Georgia. Once again, that's csa-davis.org. Until next time, remember your pure essence of being an eternal relationship with the infinite.